Let's face it, our world is in decline. All across the West, the middle class is shrinking and the working class is suffering. Incomes have stagnated for 4 decades. For most of the young, owning a home is a dim and distant dream. Corporate offshoring, insecure work, worse wages and conditions. These are the new realities of the 21st century. To make matters worse, your political elites affirm this new status quo with less and less shame or ambiguity. Not so long ago, even blue-collar work could earn a man a decent living and his family a middle-class lifestyle. It would have afforded him the respect of his fellow citizens, companionship with his fellow workers, and the dignity of self-sufficiency. These jobs, factory work, trucking, construction, are now increasingly the domain of migrants. Even white-collar jobs are seeing crippling levels of labor replacement in precisely those industries that Western workers were promised to transition to in the economy of the 21st century. Little surprise that Donald Trump's successful bid for the presidency came largely on the back of promises to address illegal immigration, to construct a border wall, to reintroduce economic protectionism. Across the West, a similar scarcity of work, wages, and dignity has driven a steep rise in populist and nationalist sentiment. 2016 saw the victory of Brexit. More striking still, the suddenness and scale of the Yellow Vests movement has shaken Europe and sparked similar protests across the continent. Every country in Europe now boasts active and growing anti-establishment parties. All of them are, in large part, reactions to similar demographic and economic trends as those occurring in America. Neither is the acceleration of what we've come to call identity politics limited to the old ethnic stock of Europe and America. In 2020, Black Lives Matter went global, sparking protests and riots not only throughout America but in cities across Europe and as far afield as Auckland and Sydney. The acceleration of this global battle for resources and political power, fought largely along racial lines, will only be exacerbated by the 1 in 6 current jobs slated to be eliminated by automation. The collision of these kinds of social trends make it certain that the most destructive phases of identitarian upheaval lie ahead of us, not behind. 2 centuries ago, the average woman had 5 children in countries like the UK and the US. Today, the average Western birth rate is below replacement levels. Based on current trends, the native peoples of places like France and England will disappear in just a few generations. If only at a subconscious level, we see the dawning recognition of these changes. Rates of depression, anxiety, and substance abuse have skyrocketed, and with them, the rate of suicide. The opioid crisis, which has seen tens of thousands overdose on painkillers, is only a taste of what we might expect in coming decades. The basic expectation of previous generations, that their children would live better than those who came before, looks set to be betrayed in a stunning repudiation of every golden lie about the superiority of liberal democracy, capitalism, and modern values. Underlying and facilitating this economic rot is a deeply rooted cultural decadence. To name but one example, the intellectual movements associated with the Frankfurt School have cast dark associations on the old bases of society. To these self-styled renegades, the fundamental legitimacy of the family, of traditional complementary gender roles, and of parental authority were evidence of sexual dysfunction, repression, and even hatred. Ironically enough, The resulting collapse of social harmony, the overt sexualization and pornification of culture, has led to a widespread sexual and spiritual sterilization. People are increasingly living single, sexless, loveless lives, and the disappearance of committed marriage is a foregone conclusion. At times, we get a sense of how deeply ingrained this decadence has become. We clearly perceive the promotion, even the celebration, of bad morality, bad spirituality, bad aesthetics, and we're cast in the position of naysayers and prudes. Part of the reason the culture industry is so invasive and parasitic on public morals is because this shift has happened slowly. We as individuals and as a collective have been the proverbial boiling frogs. We have been subtly subjected to more and more extreme and decadent conditions without becoming aware of it. This series of videos is intended to break that pattern by looking at cultural forms, both ancient and contemporary, through the lens of REM theory. The term REM harkens to the phase of rapid eye movement sleep. During this phase of sleep, our dreaming is most active. In the cultural context, REM theory refers to the conscious inception of dreams, desires, and motivations by artists, parabolists, and their often conscious enablers. REM theory traces a web of carefully crafted hidden messages embedded within art for the purposes of positively moralizing one group and demoralizing another. The supposition of REM theory is that this kind of coded messaging is a subversive but common and salient phenomenon, not merely in contemporary media, but in artistic and intellectual expression appearing throughout human civilization, including within ancient religion. The theory argues that at a certain stage of civilizational development, such subversive messaging will appear, concealed in relatively innocuous or acceptable forms. As audience populations come to trust this artistic mode or medium, the messaging will steadily grow more explicitly subversive. The result is a gradual but radical and deep-seated conditioning of target populations. To demonstrate just how far this process has reached in our own time and place, perhaps it's simplest to point to Hollywood's sister industry in the San Fernando Valley, also known as Porn Valley. The internet has fundamentally changed the way in which pornography can be consumed. The average age that a child first views pornography is now 11 years old. Some studies have suggested that children aged 10 and under account for a full fifth of online porn consumption. From an early age, children, prepubescents, and adolescents are desensitized to sex, and their ability to pair bond is irreparably compromised. It could be argued that since the rise of the internet in the 90s, children have been de facto sexually abused on a previously unimaginable scale. In the face of persistent, unapologetic evil and ugliness like this, nihilism becomes an all-too-easy refuge. Why, after all, should we care? To scientifically and historically enlightened men, all human time passes in the blink of an eye. All human achievement is trivial and temporary. Good and evil, beauty and horror have the same rights, the same validity. Perhaps this is where the story ends, with the race of people Nietzsche called the last men, who struggle only to end struggle, who tend quietly to their machines and to the tiny garden of their human rights. In the end, it's a testament to our ruined psychological state that such a question even need be asked. No other being questions the legitimacy of its own striving and survival. Some historians and philosophers have argued that this decline is inevitable, even terminal, that civilizations are like plants arising from soil, reactive to the seasons, each basking in a golden springtime, each withering in an inevitable fall. But is such a fall, in fact, inevitable? Are these cycles beyond our control? Are we incapable of grasping the roots of this dilemma, of finding a cure to this disease? Any change would require a new consensus based on a new system of understanding. But what would change the consensus? Some have surmised that a religious awakening is necessary, such as a return to Christian values. REM theorists conclude that the answer is Apolloism.